They told her she was too broken to be loved. So she chose to die saving a stranger. What she didn't know was that the stranger was the Alpha King of the Glacial Dominion, and that a 4-year-old boy who had already buried his parents would watch her collapse and whisper, "If he dies too, it means I'm cursed." In the frozen north, rejection is not embarrassment. It is exile. It is disgrace. It is a scar carved straight through the soul. 3 weeks before the night that rewrote her fate, Lyra Valehart stood beneath a merciless full moon while her mate, Alpha Ronan Thorncrest, severed their sacred bond before his entire pack. Unworthy. Defective. Cursed. He said the moon goddess had made a mistake pairing him with a woman whose silver-white hair and pale skin made her look like death walking. He said no strong alpha could ever want a mate who resembled a ghost. And when the bond snapped, it did not break cleanly. It tore. Cast out with nothing but her healer's satchel and the phantom ache of a broken mate bond burning in her chest, Lyra wandered the Shatterfrost expanse alone, surviving on scraps, offering her rare healing gift to packs who would gladly take her magic, but never her presence. Because in the north, a rejected mate carries a scent worse than blood. The scent of failure. She believed humiliation was the worst pain she would ever endure. She was wrong. Because on the coldest night of the season, when silence swallowed the frostlands whole and even the wind held its breath, she heard the dying roar of something powerful echo through the ice caverns. And Lyra, exhausted, half-starved, convinced she no longer mattered, made a choice that would bind her not only to a throne, but to a child who believed everyone who loved him disappears. Before this story continues, ask yourself something. Have you ever watched someone walk away and wondered if it was your fault? Have you ever believed you were too much, or not enough, or somehow cursed to be left behind? Stay with this story. Because not every rejection is proof that you are broken. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes it is redirection. And sometimes it is the only thing standing between you and forever love. Chapter 1. The moon was full the night Lyra Valehart learned how easily destiny could be rewritten. It hung massive and silver above the Emberfang clearing, illuminating rows of wolves gathered in ceremonial silence. Torches burned along the perimeter. Snow drifted lazily from the sky, soft and harmless, a beautiful night for a bond blessing. A terrible night for humiliation. Lyra stood at the center of the circle, palms damp despite the cold, silver-white hair cascading down her back like frostlight. Her wolf paced inside her ribs, restless but hopeful. Across from her stood Alpha Ronan Thorncrest. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark-eyed. Every inch the warrior his pack admired. Every inch the mate the moon goddess had chosen for her. The elder lifted her staff. Under the witness of the moon we seal. Stop. The word cracked across the clearing like a whip. Murmurs rippled outward. Lyra's breath faltered. Ronan did not look at the elder. He looked at her. And there was no warmth in his gaze. I will not seal this bond. The world tilted. The elder blinked. Alpha Ronan, the moon has already marked. The moon made a mistake. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Lyra felt something inside her chest tighten. Ronan, she whispered, barely audible. He turned fully toward the gathered wolves instead of her. My mate is meant to strengthen this pack. To stand beside me in battle. To command respect. His voice carried easily over the snow. Not look like a walking omen. A few wolves shifted uncomfortably. Lyra's fingers curled at her sides. My alpha, she tried again. He faced her now, eyes cold. Look at you, Lyra. Pale as a corpse. Hair like winter ash. You don't look like a Luna. You look like something dragged from a grave. A quiet laugh came from somewhere in the circle. Her wolf recoiled. The bond between them flickered, fragile, strained. You're a healer, he continued. A soft gift. A weak gift. I need strength. I need a mate who inspires fear. Her throat burned. I would stand beside you, she said. I have never faltered. Exactly, he replied sharply. You survive. You endure. You hide behind kindness. That is not power. The elder stepped forward. Alpha, the bond is sacred. To sever it willingly. I reject it. The words dropped like an execution blade. Lyra felt it before she understood it. A tearing sensation beneath her ribs. A violent snap. The sacred thread binding her to him shredded, not cleanly, not mercifully, but ragged and brutal. She gasped, knees buckling. The clearing watched. No one stepped forward. Ronan inhaled deeply, as if relieved. I reject Lyra Valehart as my mate. I sever this bond and return it to the moon. The pain exploded outward. Her wolf howled in her mind, wounded, betrayed. Something warm ran down her lip. Blood. The elder lowered her gaze. The pack lowered theirs. Not in shame. In dismissal. Lyra forced herself upright. The bond scar burned like an open brand across her chest, invisible to the eye but raw and bleeding in her aura. 3 words echoed louder than the severing. Unworthy. Defective. Mistake. Ronan turned away first. That hurt more than the rejection. You may collect your belongings, he said over his shoulder. You will leave before dawn. Not please go. Not I'm sorry. Just removal. As if she were furniture that no longer suited the room. The ceremony circle dissolved around her. No one met her eyes. Her healer's satchel was placed at her feet by a young Omega who wouldn't look up. Lyra bent slowly, fingers trembling, and picked it up. The moon above seemed colder now. She did not cry. Not when she crossed the pack boundary alone. Not when the bond ache pulsed through her chest like a phantom limb torn away. Not when the wind swallowed the clearing behind her. She did not look back. Because if she looked back, she might beg. And she would rather freeze. 3 weeks later, Lyra walked through the Shatterfrost expanse with frost clinging to her lashes and hunger gnawing through her ribs. She had healed a child in one pack. Closed a warrior's chest wound in another. Stayed nowhere longer than 2 nights. Wolves could smell rejection. It clung to her like smoke. The phantom ache where the mate bond once lived throbbed constantly, draining her strength in quiet, relentless waves. She had not slept properly in days. The blizzard had finally stopped. That should have been her first warning. In the north, silence was never peace. Silence meant something powerful was watching. She adjusted her satchel and kept walking. The nearest settlement was a day away. If she kept moving, she would survive. Survival was what she did best. Then it came. A sound that split the frozen air. Deep. Agonized. Massive. Not the cry of a common wolf. Something larger. Something ancient. It echoed off the ice cliffs and rolled through her bones like distant thunder. Lyra froze. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around. An injured predator was the most dangerous creature in the Frostlands. And she was alone. The sound came again. Weaker. Raw. Desperate. Her healer's senses flared. Pain. Overwhelming pain. Silver. Her stomach dropped. Silver wounds meant assassination. And silver meant death. She should walk away. She should preserve what little strength she had left. No one would blame a rejected Omega for choosing survival. But the cry came again. And beneath the agony, she felt power. Not just strength. Authority. Ancient alpha dominance pulsing faintly. Whatever was dying out there. It mattered. She closed her eyes briefly. Damn it, she whispered. Then she turned toward the sound. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she followed the fading growl into a jagged ice formation carved by centuries of storm. The air inside the cavern was metallic, thick with blood. She rounded a bend and stopped. The largest wolf she had ever seen lay collapsed against the frozen stone. Black fur matted with frost and crimson. Claw marks ripped deep across his ribs. Silver-poisoned punctures marred his throat and shoulder. Steam rose from his wounds. His chest heaved weakly. Golden eyes flickered open, locked onto hers. Not wild, not feral, aware, waiting. And in that gaze, hope. Lyra's pulse stuttered. This was no rogue. This was an alpha. A powerful one. And he was dying. Chapter 2. When Draven Winterborne opened his eyes, he expected pain. He expected the slow suffocation of silver in his blood, the tearing burn in his lungs, the crushing weight of knowing he had failed again. Instead, he drew a full breath. Strong. Unrestricted. His heart thundered steadily against his ribs. The poison was gone. Every wound that had carved into him only moments before had vanished as if erased by the hand of the moon goddess herself. For one suspended second, he thought he had crossed into death. Then he felt her. A fragile weight collapsed over his chest. Warm. Still. Too still. He lifted his head slowly, and the world narrowed to silver-white hair spilling across black fur, to pale skin drained of color, to a woman who looked as if winter itself had claimed her. Memory struck with brutal clarity. Her hands pressed to him, her magic igniting like wildfire. The way her breath had grown shallow. The way her body had trembled as she poured herself into him. She had used Heartfire. For him. Draven shifted instantly, bones cracking and reforming as he took human shape, catching her before she slipped from his body. She was freezing. Colder than the cavern air. He pressed shaking fingers to her throat. Nothing. No. There. A pulse. So faint it terrified him. And then it happened. Not gently. Not gradually. The mate bond detonated inside his chest. Golden. Unbreakable. Absolute. It slammed into him with such force that his breath caught in his throat. Mate. The word echoed through his mind like a war drum. This woman, this reckless, selfless healer who had nearly burned herself to ash saving him, was his fated mate. An hour ago, he had not known her name. Now the thought of losing her felt like being ripped apart from the inside. "You stubborn, impossible female," he whispered hoarsely, gathering her closer as if his warmth alone could force life back into her. Footsteps thundered through the ice corridor. "Your Majesty." His royal guard burst into the cavern, weapons drawn and ready to avenge a fallen king. Instead, they found him alive, unwounded, and holding a dying woman. Captain Arcturus stopped short. "You were bleeding out," he breathed. "We thought." "She healed me," Draven cut in, his voice rougher than any of them had ever heard it. "She used Heartfire." Shock rippled through the warriors. Heartfire was not ordinary healing magic. It was life for life. It meant she had given him something that could not easily be returned. "Call High Healer Melis," Draven ordered. "Now." A runner shifted instantly and disappeared into the night. And then he heard it. A small voice behind him. "Uncle." Draven turned. Rowan stood at the entrance of the cavern, breath fogging in the cold air, golden eyes wide and too old for his small face. 4.5 years old. Old enough to remember blood in the snow. Old enough to know what death looks like. Rowan looked at Draven first. He scanned him quickly. No wounds, no silver, no blood. Relief flooded him so suddenly his shoulders sagged. Then his gaze shifted to the woman in Draven's arms. And everything stilled. "She saved you," Rowan said quietly. Draven nodded once. Yes. The boy stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone approaching a sleeping wolf that might disappear if touched too roughly. She's cold, Rowan murmured. His voice didn't tremble. That frightened Draven more than tears would have. Without asking permission, without looking up, Rowan reached forward and slipped his small hand into Lyra's. Cold fingers against colder skin. Draven felt it, that tiny act of quiet determination. Rowan did not look at him. He did not speak again. He simply held her hand. As if refusing to let the world steal one more person from him. High healer Maelys arrived breathless moments later and dropped to her knees beside them. Her glowing hands hovered over Lyra's chest. Her face went pale. She's nearly depleted, Maelys whispered. This is Heartfire collapse. She transferred core life essence. Then stabilize her, Draven growled. Your Majesty, she gave him everything. Her own heart is failing because there is nothing left to burn. The mate bond trembled violently in his chest. Draven stood abruptly, lifting Lyra carefully into his arms. Prepare transport, he commanded. Every master healer in Winterborne Palace. Now. He strode out of the cavern without hesitation. Rowan followed, still holding Lyra's hand. When they mounted the horses, Rowan did not climb behind Captain Arcturus. He climbed up beside Draven. And he did not let go. The ride back to Winterborne Palace cut through freezing wind and endless snow, but Rowan's small fingers remained wrapped around Lyra's. Not when her breathing faltered. Not when Draven adjusted his grip. Not when fear tightened his own chest with every uneven pulse he felt beneath his thumb. Rowan held on like someone anchoring a drifting ship. He did not cry. He did not speak. He just stayed. When the palace gates burst open in torchlight and urgency, servants clearing a path, Rowan walked beside the stretcher as the healers lifted Lyra away from Draven's arms. Still holding her hand. Prince Rowan, one healer said gently, we need space. Rowan shook his head once. No sound and no protest. He simply tightened his grip. As if he believed that if he let go, she would vanish. Draven watched that small act, and something inside his chest cracked open. Let him stay, he ordered quietly. 6 master healers formed a circle around Lyra in the royal infirmary. Ancient healing magic filled the chamber, golden and silver light weaving together in desperate incantations. Lyra's body arched once as power surged through her. Her heartbeat faltered. Stopped. Draven felt it through the mate bond, a sharp hollow absence. Rowan felt it too. His fingers tightened reflexively around hers. Don't leave, he whispered, not loudly, not desperately, but with a quiet fear that cut deeper than any scream. The healers shouted in unison. Magic flared brighter than dawn. And then, a gasp. Soft. Fragile. Real. Lyra's chest rose. Fell. Rose again. She's breathing, Maelys exhaled shakily. Barely, but breathing. Draven closed his eyes for one suspended moment of relief before regaining control. He stepped to Lyra's side and placed his hand gently over Rowan's smaller one, both of them still holding hers. The mate bond steadied, weak but present. You saved an Alpha King, he murmured to her unconscious form. And now we save you. Rowan did not move. Did not release her. As if somewhere deep inside him, he had already decided. The woman who chose to die for his uncle was not allowed to disappear. Not from this world. Not from him. Chapter 3. The Winterborne Palace Infirmary had once carried the scent of smoke and blood. Draven remembered that night too clearly, the night his sister and her mate had been carried through these same doors, their bodies already cooling, their son screaming until his voice had broken. Rowan had not spoken since. Not a single word. Not in the infirmary. Not in the palace halls. Not even in his sleep. And now the room held another body on its central slab. Not dead, not yet, the healer said. The woman who had nearly burned herself to ash saving him. She lay unnaturally still beneath layers of woven furs and glowing sigils, silver-white hair spread across the pillow like frost over stone, skin so pale she seemed carved for moonlight. 6 master healers surrounded her in rotating shifts, their magic steady and controlled, feeding small, careful pulses into her depleted core. Draven stood near the foot of the bed, hands clasped behind his back to hide their tension. He was a king. He did not unravel. Not in front of his court. Not in front of the child watching everything. Rowan had not left her side. From the moment they entered the palace, he had walked beside the stretcher, fingers wrapped tightly around her hand. When the healers had tried to gently separate him. "Prince Rowan, we need space," one of them had said softly. He had not answered. He had not looked at them. He had simply tightened his small fingers around hers. That was the answer. Draven had seen it. He had nodded once to the healers. Let him stay. Now Rowan sat on the edge of the infirmary chair, legs too short to reach the floor, his hands still threaded with hers. He did not cry. He did not speak. But he did not let go. On the 4th night, something changed. It was subtle. A shift in the air. A flicker through the mate bond Draven did not yet understand how to navigate. The healer's fingers twitched. Rowan noticed first. His back straightened instantly. His grip tightened. The master healers leaned in, magic gathering in soft gold light around their palms. Draven remembered that night too clearly, the night his sister and her mate had been carried through these same doors, their bodies already cooling, their son screaming until his voice had broken. Rowan had not spoken since. Not a single word. Not in the infirmary. Not in the palace halls. Not even in his sleep. And now the room held another body on its central slab. Not dead, not yet, the healer said. The woman who had nearly burned herself to ash saving him. She lay unnaturally still beneath layers of woven furs and glowing sigils, silver-white hair spread across the pillow like frost over stone, skin so pale she seemed carved for moonlight. 6 master healers surrounded her in rotating shifts, their magic steady and controlled, feeding small, careful pulses into her depleted core. Draven stood near the foot of the bed, hands clasped behind his back to hide their tension. He was a king. He did not unravel. Not in front of his court. Not in front of the child watching everything. Rowan had not left her side. From the moment they entered the palace, he had walked beside the stretcher, fingers wrapped tightly around her hand. When the healers had tried to gently separate him. "Prince Rowan, we need space," one of them had said softly. He had not answered. He had not looked at them. He had simply tightened his small fingers around hers. That was the answer. Draven had seen it. He had nodded once to the healers. Let him stay. Now Rowan sat on the edge of the infirmary chair, legs too short to reach the floor, his hands still threaded with hers. He did not cry. He did not speak. But he did not let go. On the 4th night, something changed. It was subtle. A shift in the air. A flicker through the mate bond Draven did not yet understand how to navigate. The healer's fingers twitched. Rowan noticed first. His back straightened instantly. His grip tightened. The master healers leaned in, magic gathering in soft gold light around their palms. Her breathing deepened. A faint crease formed between her brows. And then slowly, painfully, her eyes opened. Ice blue. Clouded with confusion. She blinked once. Twice. Her gaze moved slowly across the ceiling carved with ancient healing runes, then to the glow of magic around her. Finally, to the small hand wrapped around hers. She stilled. Rowan did not move. Did not smile. Did not speak. He simply stared at her as if confirming something sacred. Her lips parted. "Am I alive?" she whispered. Her voice was fragile, dry, almost broken. Draven stepped forward but did not touch her. Yes, he answered evenly. Her eyes shifted to him then. Recognition flickered faintly. The wolf, she murmured. Yes. She searched his face, scanning for wounds, for weakness. Finding none. Relief softened her expression. Good, she breathed. It was not dramatic. It was not grateful. It was satisfied. As if the fact that he lived justified everything. She tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her instantly, and her body trembled with the effort. Easy, one of the healers cautioned. You burned through your core, another added gently. You are fortunate to be breathing. Her gaze dropped to her own hands, then to the small hand still holding hers. For the first time, she truly saw him. A boy. Golden eyes too old for his age. Dark curls falling into his face. Silent. Watching her like she might vanish. She studied him for a long second. Then with slow effort, she curled her fingers faintly against his. A small squeeze. Reassurance. Rowan inhaled sharply. Not a word. But his shoulders lowered slightly. Something in him eased. Draven noticed. He noticed everything. The way Rowan leaned closer. The way the healer's expression softened when she looked at the boy instead of the king. The way the room felt different now that her eyes were open. What is this place? She asked quietly. Winterborne Palace, Draven replied. Understanding flickered faintly across her face. You're... He held her gaze steadily. Yes. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories. The man she had nearly died for. Her expression did not change into awe. Or fear. Or calculation. Only acceptance. You should not have used Heartfire, Melis said softly. The healer's eyes hardened faintly. He was dying. It wasn't a defense. It was a statement of fact. Rowan's fingers tightened slightly again at that. She noticed. Her gaze softened further. You were there, she said gently to him. He did not respond. But his thumb moved faintly against her knuckles. Draven felt something twist deep in his chest. Because that was the most Rowan had reacted to anyone in years. You need rest, Melis insisted. No more strain. The healer nodded faintly. But she did not close her eyes. Not yet. Instead, she kept looking at the boy. As if memorizing him. As if recognizing something in his silence. And Rowan. For the first time since his parents' bodies had been carried from this very room. Did not look afraid of the infirmary walls. Because this time, someone inside them had come back. Chapter 4. Lyra was allowed to leave the infirmary bed on the 8th morning. Not far. Just to sit upright in a cushioned chair beside the window where pale winter light spilled across her lap. Her strength had not returned fully, but the gray tint had left her skin, and the tremor in her hands had lessened to something manageable. Rowan sat beside her as he had every day since she woke. He did not speak. He rarely blinked when he watched her. As if confirming repeatedly that she remained solid. That she had not vanished overnight. At some point in the late afternoon, exhaustion finally claimed him. His small shoulders sagged. His chin dipped forward. He slumped sideways in the chair, curls falling into his eyes, but his hand never loosened around hers. Even in sleep, his fingers stayed locked. Lyra studied him quietly. He hasn't let go since the cavern, she said softly. Draven stood near the hearth, arms folded loosely, watching both of them. No. There was no elaboration. She shifted her gaze to him. You let him stay. Yes. A small silence stretched between them. The palace felt quieter than it should have for a seat of power. Lyra glanced down at the faint scar beneath her collarbone, barely visible, but present. She didn't hide it. Draven noticed. I am aware of what was done to you, he said evenly. Her eyes lifted slowly. The words landed heavier than she expected. Heat crept into her face. Humiliation was harder to face than death. The healers told you, she said quietly. Yes. He did not say more. He did not pity. He did not offer outrage. He simply acknowledged it. It was public, she added after a moment. He made sure of that. Draven's jaw tightened slightly. You were rejected, he said calmly. Not discarded. Her lips parted faintly at that distinction. It feels the same, she replied. He studied her for a long moment. I know what it is to lose someone you believed would remain. She looked at him more closely then. Your mate. My sister, he answered instead. Lyra stilled. She glanced down at Rowan, still slumped in the chair, still holding her hand. He was 2 when it happened, Draven continued. Rogues breached the eastern border. They carried his parents into this infirmary. He watched. Lyra's fingers tightened faintly around Rowan's. He hasn't spoken since. She looked at him sharply. Not to you. Not to anyone. Silence settled heavily again. Lyra traced her thumb lightly over the back of Rowan's hand, a soothing gesture she hadn't realized she knew. He thinks rooms like this take people away, she said quietly. Draven did not answer. Because it was true. Lyra looked at Rowan for a long moment. When I was rejected, she said slowly, it felt like being erased while still breathing. Draven held her gaze. And yet you chose to save me. She gave a faint, tired smile. You were dying. That is not an explanation. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she asked softly, does he sleep through the night? Rarely. She nodded once, understanding more than he had expected her to. The mate bond between them pulsed faintly. Still delicate. Still new. But no longer fraying. Rowan shifted in his sleep, his grip tightening reflexively. Lyra leaned forward slightly despite her weakness and adjusted the blanket over his shoulders. Instinctive. Protective. Draven watched her carefully. You do not owe this palace anything, he said after a moment. Her gaze lifted. I know. And yet you remain. She considered that. He stayed first, she replied softly, glancing down at the boy. That answer struck deeper than he anticipated. Draven moved closer, lowering his voice. You will not be forced into anything here. She studied him carefully. Not fearful. Measuring. I don't trust fate, she admitted. I don't ask you to. Another quiet stretch of shared understanding passed between them. Outside the window, snow fell in slow spirals against the gray sky. Inside, a broken healer and a silent child shared warmth neither of them had expected to find. And the Alpha King of the Northern Territories realized something dangerous. The woman who had saved his life might be the only one capable of giving his nephew back his childhood. Chapter 5. The first snowfall of early winter came 2 weeks after Lyra left the infirmary. By then she had been moved to a quieter chamber in the eastern wing, warm, sunlit, far from the scent of antiseptic herbs and memory. Rowan followed. Of course he did. He had not returned to formal lessons. Had not resumed training. Had not spoken a single word in the great hall. But every morning, without fail, he appeared outside her chamber door. Sometimes before the guards even changed shifts. He would sit beside her while she took tea. While she practiced rebuilding her magic in careful, controlled breaths. While she simply stared at the frost gathering along the balcony railing. He did not demand. He did not question. He simply remained. That afternoon, Lyra found him sitting cross-legged on the rug near the hearth, staring at nothing in particular. You don't have to sit so straight, she said gently. You're allowed to relax." He didn't answer. She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Did anyone ever tell you that silence can be heavy?" His gaze flickered toward her briefly, then away. She rose carefully, still regaining strength, and crossed the room to sit on the floor across from him. Not above him. Not towering. Equal. "My grandmother used to say silence grows when no one feels safe enough to break it." Rowan's fingers twitched against his knee. Lyra continued softly, "I didn't speak much after my bond was severed." His head lifted at that. The first real reaction she had seen. "It feels like something inside you tears," she said. "And you're afraid if you speak, the rest of you might fall apart too." Rowan swallowed. His eyes shone faintly in the firelight. She waited. Did not push. Did not reach. Just waited. The silence stretched. Thick. Fragile. And then, a whisper. "Mama didn't come back." The sound was so soft she almost wondered if she imagined it. But she hadn't. Her breath caught. It was the first word he had spoken since the night his parents were carried from the infirmary. He didn't look at her. He stared at the flames. "Papa didn't either," he added, voice trembling slightly. Lyra did not react dramatically. She did not cry. She did not gasp. She simply nodded once. "I know." He glanced at her sharply. "You weren't there," he said, a flicker of defensiveness breaking through. "No," she agreed. "But I know what it feels like when someone who was supposed to stay, doesn't." His jaw tightened. "They said it wasn't my fault," he muttered. "But it happened anyway." There it was. The wound beneath the silence. Lyra shifted slightly closer, slow enough not to startle him. "Sometimes terrible things happen because the world is cruel," she said gently. "Not because someone is." Rowan's hands curled into fists. "Everyone who loves me goes away," he whispered. The words were small, but they shook the room. Lyra felt something inside her chest break open quietly. She reached forward, not to grab, not to force, but to place her hand palm up between them. "An offering." "I'm still here," she said. He stared at her hand, unmoving. "If Uncle had died," his voice cracked, "it would mean I break people." Lyra inhaled slowly. "No," she said firmly, but softly. "It would mean someone attacked him. It would mean he fought. It would mean he survived because someone helped." His eyes filled with tears he had refused for 2 years. "And if you die too?" he asked. There it was. The true fear. Lyra leaned forward carefully and wrapped both her hands around his. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not dramatic. Not sworn on magic. Not bound by fate. Just certain." Rowan searched her face the way children do when they are measuring whether they dare believe something. "You promise?" he asked. She did not hesitate. "I promise." The word hung between them. And for the first time since the rogue attack, Rowan cried. Not violently. Not hysterically. Just quiet tears sliding down his cheeks as he leaned forward into her arms. Lyra held him, careful of her healing body, but firm, protective. Outside the chamber door, Draven stood motionless. He had come to check on his nephew. Instead, he had heard every word. He had seen his son's shoulders finally shake with grief that had waited too long. And he had watched the woman who had nearly died for him heal something his entire kingdom could not. Not with magic. Not with command. But with presence. Draven stepped back silently. Because some moments did not belong to kings. They belonged to mothers. And for the first time since the night he lost his sister, Draven allowed himself to believe something he had not dared hope for. Rowan was not cursed. He was grieving. And the woman inside that chamber might just be the answer fate had written for both of them. Chapter 6. The first month, Rowan only spoke inside Lyra's chambers. The second month, he tested the edges of the palace. By the third, he began testing his uncle. It started at dinner. Rowan stared at his plate of roasted root vegetables as if they had personally betrayed him. "I don't like them," he muttered. Draven didn't look up from his goblet. "You ate them yesterday." "I was pretending." Lyra pressed her lips together to stop her smile from escaping. Draven exhaled through his nose, the sound of a king trying not to react like a soldier. "You need strength." Rowan's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He just turned his head slowly toward Lyra. "Uncle makes me eat things I don't like." It wasn't accusation. It was a test. Lyra tilted her head thoughtfully, as if considering a matter of diplomacy. "Do you think he eats things he doesn't like?" Rowan blinked. Draven's gaze shifted to her sharply. She continued, calm and mild, "Kings do a great many things they don't enjoy." Rowan studied his uncle carefully now. Not as a ruler. As a person. Draven held his gaze. There was a pause long enough to feel deliberate. Then Draven picked up another piece of vegetable. Slowly. Visibly. And took a bite. With no grimace and no sigh. Just solidarity. Lyra leaned back slightly. "See?" she said softly. Rowan hesitated. Then he picked up his own fork. Took a bite. Chewed dramatically. Draven almost smiled. It wasn't about vegetables. It was about standing with him. And Rowan noticed. But healing was not linear. Some nights he slept. Some nights he didn't. Some nights he knocked. Some nights he sat outside her chamber door and waited until she opened it without him asking. By the fourth month, he had begun speaking to Draven at meals. Short statements at first. Then complaints. "He makes me wake up too early. I don't like Master Ilric. He says I have to train with wooden blades every day." Draven's instinct was always correction. "You will need discipline." Each time he said it, Rowan's shoulders stiffened. Each time, Lyra felt the tension rise. One evening, after Rowan had retreated early, Draven remained behind in the dining hall. "You contradict me often," he said quietly. "I redirect you," she replied. He didn't argue. He stared at the empty chair Rowan had vacated. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted finally. "Not king. Not alpha. Just a man." Lyra softened. "He doesn't need perfection," she said gently. "He needs permission." "For what?" "To still be a child." Draven swallowed hard. The next morning, when Rowan muttered that he hated the sword, Draven did not say "you will need it." He said, "Then we train until you feel safe holding it." Rowan looked up sharply. Safe. That word mattered. The nightmares worsened before they eased. The fourth month brought the worst one. A scream tore through the eastern wing long after midnight. Lyra was already awake when Rowan burst into her chamber. He collided into her so hard she nearly lost her footing. "They were cold," he gasped. "They didn't move." His small hands shook violently. Draven reached the doorway seconds later, but he stopped when he saw them. Lyra sat on the edge of her bed and pulled Rowan into her lap. She pressed her palm gently against his chest. His heart raced like a trapped animal. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "If you trust me." He didn't hesitate. His lashes lowered immediately. That trust was already there. She let Heartfire stir. Not the consuming blaze that had nearly killed her in the cavern. Not the life-for-life exchange. Just warmth and a gentle ember. It flowed into him in careful threads, soothing the sharpest edges of panic, untangling memory from present danger. "You're here," she murmured. "Your uncle is here. I'm here." Draven felt the shift. Not magic alone. Safety. Rowan's breathing slowed. His fingers loosened. And for the first time since the rogue attack, Rowan's breathing evened out in her arms, small fingers finally unclenching from the fabric of her sleeve. Draven stepped fully into the chamber only when he was certain the boy was asleep. "You gave again," he said quietly. Lyra adjusted the blanket around Rowan's shoulders. "I didn't lose anything this time." He watched the faint glow of Heartfire fade beneath her palm. Watched the steadiness in her expression. Watched the way Rowan had instinctively curled toward her instead of away from the world. His golden eyes searched hers. "You are changing this palace." She shook her head faintly. "He's changing it." Draven looked down at his nephew, at the child who had been silent for 2 years, who now argued about vegetables and complained about tutors and ran down hallways again. And in that moment, something in Draven shifted too. Not just gratitude. Not just attraction. Recognition. This woman wasn't a temporary guest. She was becoming foundation. Not a healer passing through. Not a fated coincidence. Foundation. And for the first time since the rogue attack, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories allowed himself to imagine a future that did not begin with loss. Chapter 7. The training field smelled of pine resin and cold iron. Rowan stood with his boots planted firmly in the snow-dusted earth, small fingers straining against the tension of his bowstring. Lyra stood just behind him. Not correcting. Not hovering. Watching. "You're fighting it," she said gently. "I'm not," he muttered, jaw tight. The arrow loosed too early, slicing wide of the target. He groaned and dropped the bow to his side. "It's stupid." "It's difficult," she corrected quietly. He shot her a look. "Uncle doesn't miss." A voice behind them answered evenly. "That is a lie." Rowan's entire posture straightened. Draven approached at an easy pace, cloak shifting with the wind, bow already slung over his shoulder. "You miss?" Rowan asked, suspicion clear. Draven stepped beside him and picked up the fallen bow. "I miss when I rush." He handed it back. Rowan stared at him as if this new information had rearranged something in his mind. Lyra watched both of them carefully. Rowan turned to her suddenly. "Stand like this," he ordered, tugging at her elbow. "No, not like that." She obeyed completely, allowing him to correct her stance. Draven didn't interrupt. He saw what she was doing. Giving Rowan control in a space that usually belonged to him. Lyra drew the string back. The tension pulled across her shoulder. "Don't fight the wind," Rowan instructed. "Uncle says you wait for it." She inhaled. Waited. Released. The arrow struck the outer edge of the target. Rowan's eyes widened. "You hit it." "Barely." "But you didn't miss." There it was again. Not about aim. About disappearing. Rowan stepped forward, reclaiming the bow. He set his feet carefully and drew back. He paused longer this time. The arrow flew straight and struck near center. He turned toward Draven, pride bright in his eyes. "Uncle is the best archer in the north." Draven gave a small shrug. "I've practiced longer." Rowan shook his head fiercely. "He never lets go too soon." The words hung in the air. Draven answered without thinking. "Neither do you." Rowan froze. The confidence drained from his expression in an instant. "Yes, I do," he said quietly. Draven stilled. Lyra stepped forward before the silence hardened. "You let go when you think you have to," she said softly. "That's not the same." Rowan didn't look at either of them. He looked at the target. "At least arrows don't disappear," he muttered. The wind shifted between them. Draven's throat tightened. Lyra knelt so she was level with Rowan's eyes. People don't disappear because of you, she said gently. His gaze flicked to her. You could, he whispered. There was no accusation in it. Just fear. Lyra stood slowly and walked to Draven's side. Close enough that Rowan could see the space between them. She didn't reach for him immediately. She let Rowan measure it. Draven didn't move away. Didn't step forward either. Just stayed. Steady. Rowan walked toward them slowly. He stopped in front of them, then deliberately stepped between them, pressing his back against Draven and his chest against Lyra as if testing whether they would shift. Neither did. He exhaled. A long, relieved breath. Then ran to collect his arrows. When he was far enough not to hear, Draven spoke quietly. You contradict me often. I interrupt your instincts, she replied. He didn't smile. I know what was said to you. Lyra's shoulders tightened. You shouldn't have asked. I didn't. She turned toward him sharply. Then why do you know? Because I rule these lands. Because the man who rejected you bragged about it. The humiliation flared again, hot and unwelcome. I was an embarrassment, she said evenly. You were a threat, Draven corrected. She looked at him, startled. To a man who didn't understand strength that doesn't roar. Her breath hitched faintly. You don't know that. I know what I see. She searched his face for pity. There was none. Only certainty. I will not mark you because the bond exists, he continued. And I will not claim you because fate attached itself to us. The wind picked up, lifting strands of her silver hair across her cheek. I am asking nothing from you, he said quietly. But if you choose to stay, let it be because you want this life. Not because you were told you were unworthy of another. There it was. Risk. He wasn't claiming. He was offering space. And space meant she could leave. Lyra felt it then, the absence of pressure. The absence of demand. She realized something quietly devastating. She hadn't packed her satchel in months. She hadn't asked about travel routes. She hadn't braced for dismissal. I am not staying because I was rejected, she said slowly. His gaze held hers. I am staying because he laughs here. Rowan's voice echoed across the field. And because you are trying. Draven's jaw tightened slightly. And because, she added more softly, when you miss, you admit it. That broke something in him. He stepped closer, but not abruptly. Slow enough for her to step back if she wished. She didn't. Their foreheads touched first. A pause. Breath shared. A silent question. She answered it by closing the distance herself. The kiss wasn't possession. It wasn't fire. It was decision. Rowan's boots pounded back toward them. He stopped short when he saw them standing close. He looked from one to the other carefully. Are you practicing not letting go? He asked. Draven blinked. Lyra smiled softly. Yes. Rowan nodded, satisfied. Good. He grabbed her hand. Don't practice leaving. The simplicity of it struck harder than any vow. Lyra crouched and brushed snow from his sleeve. I won't. Draven watched them, and understood. This wasn't fate closing around them. It was three people choosing each other. And that choice felt stronger than any bond the moon could forge. Chapter 8. Lyra had faced assassins, rejection, death itself, but standing before the mirror in her chamber that evening made her hands tremble. Not from fear. From weight. The gown she wore was simple ivory, stitched with silver thread that caught light like frost under moonlight. It wasn't heavy, wasn't jeweled, wasn't designed to overwhelm. Draven had insisted she choose something that felt like herself. Strength without spectacle. A soft knock sounded. Not formal. Not guarded. 3 uneven taps. She smiled faintly, asked to come in. Rowan entered carefully, hands hidden behind his back. His expression was far too serious for a child of 4.5, a habit he'd carried since the night his parents never came back from the infirmary. He stopped in front of her and stared. "You look," he hesitated. "Different," she offered gently. He nodded. "Like you're about to leave." The words were small, but they cut. Lyra turned fully toward him. "I'm not leaving." He searched her face carefully, studying her the way he always did, not as a child looking for comfort, but as someone measuring truth. Satisfied, he stepped forward and revealed what he had been hiding. A circlet, silver woven with delicate gold filaments, shaped like crescent arcs and winter leaves. Frost blue stones shimmered subtly along the front, not large, not flashy, but luminous. "I told Master Aaron how your hair shines in the morning," Rowan said quickly, as if courage might leave him if he paused. "And how it glows in the sun. And I said it shouldn't be heavy because you don't like heavy things." Lyra's breath caught. "You designed this?" He nodded. "For your wedding." She lowered to her knees in front of him. "It's beautiful." He shifted awkwardly. "I didn't know if Uncle would get you one." "He would have," she said softly. Rowan frowned slightly. "But this one is from me." That mattered more. Lyra reached for the circlet. And that was when it happened. "Mom." The word slipped out naturally. Unrehearsed. Rowan froze instantly. His eyes widened. "I didn't mean, I just..." He swallowed hard, face flushing. "You don't have to be," he added quickly. "I just forget sometimes and it just comes out." Lyra didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She waited. The space stretched gently between them. Finally, she tilted his chin upward. "If you want to call me that," she said steadily, "you don't have to correct yourself." His voice trembled. "But what if you don't want to be?" There it was. Not title but permanence. Lyra cupped his face fully now. "I chose your uncle," she said quietly. "But I chose you too." He blinked. "Can you be my mom?" There was no drama and no theatrics. Just hope. "Yes." The words settled into the room like something sacred. Rowan's arms wrapped around her neck tightly. "Forever," he whispered. "Forever." He pulled back suddenly and climbed onto the nearby chair, carefully placing the circlet on her head, adjusting it with utmost concentration. "There," he declared proudly. "Queens need crowns." She looked into the mirror. Not at the circlet. At the boy standing beside her reflection. She had been crowned before the ceremony even began. A knock sounded at the door. Draven's voice carried through. "It's time." Rowan grabbed her hand. "Don't practice leaving," he reminded her. "I won't." When she stepped into the courtyard beside Draven, the silver circlet glinted beneath the aurora light. He noticed immediately. "That wasn't mine," he murmured quietly. "No," she said softly. "It was his." Draven's gaze softened in a way few ever saw. Then the ceremony began. The courtyard was filled by dusk. Warriors stood in disciplined rows. Healers gathered near the ancient stone altar. Citizens lined the outer walls in respectful silence. The aurora shimmered faintly above, waiting. Rowan stood between Lyra and Draven. Not because protocol demanded it. Because he refused to stand anywhere else. The elder stepped forward. "This bond is not commanded. It is chosen." Draven's gaze never left Lyra's. "You step forward of your own will?" "I do." Draven waited. 1 heartbeat. 2. Giving her the space to step back if she wished. She stepped forward instead. That mattered. His hand lifted slowly and brushed the place beneath her collarbone, the space where rejection had once scarred her soul. Lyra, he said clearly, her name carrying across the silent courtyard. I claim you because you chose us. Because you stayed when leaving would have been easier. His canines extended. The bite was swift. Precise. Heartfire answered instantly. Not wild. Not destructive. Golden light unfurled between them like breath returning to lungs long held tight. Lyra gasped, not from pain, but recognition. The mate bond sealed. Settled. Strong. Beneath Draven's mark, the faint scar from her rejection burned briefly. Then dissolved. Not hidden. Not faded. Gone. The crowd felt it. The air itself seemed to steady. Rowan grabbed her hand immediately. Does that mean it can't break? He whispered urgently. Lyra crouched despite the lingering pulse in her veins. It means I'm not going anywhere. He turned to Draven. You either. Draven knelt fully in front of him. Neither of us. Rowan studied them both carefully. Then, completely ignoring royal protocol, he wrapped his arms around both their waists and squeezed as tightly as he could. The courtyard erupted. Warriors struck their chests. Healers raised glowing palms. Wolves beyond the palace walls howled long and low. But at the center of it, there were only 3 heartbeats. And none of them were leaving. Draven rose, pulling them both upright. Lyra stood between them, not marked by rejection, not bracing for departure. She was a Luna, a mother and chosen. The aurora unfolded fully above them in ribbons of green and silver. And this time, when Rowan looked up at her and said softly, Mom, there was no correction. Only belonging. Epilogue. 4 years later, the palace no longer felt like stone and command. It felt lived in. Laughter echoed through corridors that had once known only silence. The training yards rang with the snap of bowstrings and the confident voice of a boy who had learned not just how to fight, but how to stay. Rowan was 9 now. Tall for his age. Steady in his movements. Observant in ways that made older warriors shift under his gaze. In the archery yard that afternoon, he stood with his bow drawn, shoulders squared, breath controlled. Relax your grip, Lyra called gently from the wooden rail. I am relaxed, he insisted. Draven beside her muttered dryly, you look like you're preparing for siege. It's a tournament, Rowan corrected without turning. It matters. Before either adult could respond, a determined little grunt sounded behind him. Princess Alara stood near the rack of practice bows, a miniature wooden one clutched in her small hands, silver curls bouncing wildly as she imitated her brother's stance with exaggerated seriousness. Her bow tilted sideways. Her tongue stuck out in concentration. Rowan immediately lowered his own weapon and strode toward her. No, he said gently, kneeling beside her. Feet apart. Like this. He adjusted her elbows carefully. Strong. Strong, she echoed proudly. Draven watched the exchange quietly. Lyra's hand slipped into his. Rowan stood and demonstrated again. Ilara copied him, badly, but with fierce commitment. He glanced toward the heavier bows and then back at her. She shouldn't practice near those, he declared. Someone could knock her over. Draven lifted a brow. I have guards. She needs me, Rowan replied simply. Ilara toddled forward and wrapped her arms around his leg. Brother. Rowan stilled. He crouched and pressed his forehead gently to hers. Always, he promised. The formal adoption happened that winter. No roaring crowd and no spectacle. Just parchment, witnesses, and family. Rowan stood between Lyra and Draven again, but this time Ilara clung to his hand, her fingers tangled securely in his. Draven knelt in front of him. I have been your guardian, he said steadily. But I would like to be your father. Only if you choose it. Rowan didn't answer immediately. He had never rushed important decisions. If I say yes, you don't get to leave? He asked quietly. I don't get to leave, Draven replied. Rowan studied him. Then nodded once. Okay. Draven waited. Rowan swallowed. Okay, Dad. Draven's composure fractured. Just slightly, just enough. Rowan stepped forward and embraced him, not clinging, not desperate, choosing. When they parted, Rowan turned to Lyra and crouched so they were eye level. I'll be your big brother forever, he told her solemnly. Lyra reached up and pressed her tiny hand against his cheek. You always have been my brother, she declared fiercely. Forever and always. The words were imperfect. The meaning was not. Rowan's eyes shimmered. He pulled her into his arms carefully, holding her as if she were something sacred. Lyra pressed her hand to her mouth. Draven reached for her fingers. And something deeper than blood sealed itself in that quiet chamber. Belonging. Years shifted gently. Lyra grew fearless and stubborn, forever chasing Rowan through palace halls. He taught her to shoot, to stand tall, to argue properly, to never apologize for taking space. Then one winter dawn, Lyra lay in the royal chamber with a newborn prince cradled in her arms. The room smelled of cedar smoke and warm linens. Snow drifted quietly beyond the windows. Draven sat beside her, softening the edges of a man once known only for command. The infant stirred, silver at the crown of his head, golden at the lashes. A faint flicker of Heartfire shimmered briefly around him like a promise. A soft knock. Rowan stepped inside. Older now. Stronger. Still watchful. He approached slowly. Lyra shifted slightly, revealing the baby's face. This is your brother, she said softly. Rowan stared, not with jealousy. With gravity. He extended one cautious finger. The baby gripped him instantly. Rowan inhaled sharply. He's small, he murmured. For now, Draven replied. Lyra slipped in behind him and peered over his shoulder. Baby brother, she whispered proudly. Silence settled. Rowan straightened slowly, shoulders firm. I'll protect them, he said quietly. Lyra nodded vigorously. Protect. Rowan glanced at her, then back at the tiny prince. I'll protect my siblings forever, he continued more firmly. And I'll practice never to leave. The words were simple, but they carried years of healing. Draven's breath caught. Lyra felt tears gather, not from fear this time, not from sacrifice, but from witnessing growth. Rowan leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to the baby's forehead. Then he looked at Lyra. You don't have to worry anymore. She smiled softly. I never did. Because now she knew. Rejection had not made her defective. It had redirected her. Later that evening, Lyra stood in the frost gardens with Draven beside her. Snow glittered under moonlight. The palace behind them held 3 sleeping children. Not one replaced. Not one uncertain. All anchored. Draven wrapped an arm around her waist. Do you ever think about that night in the cave? He asked quietly. Sometimes. And she leaned into him. I thought I mattered because I was willing to die. Her gaze lifted to the aurora. Now I know I mattered because I stayed. Across the courtyard, Rowan stepped outside briefly, glancing up at the sky. Lyra followed, then ran back inside. He lingered a moment longer. Practicing. Staying. And the kingdom remembered not the rejection, but the redirection. If you've ever believed you were left behind, maybe you were being led somewhere better. Tell me, was there a door that closed in your life, only to open into something stronger? Sometimes the ending you fear is the beginning you need. And sometimes, it opens into forever. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt rejected, forgotten, or redirected by life, share this with someone who might need that reminder too. Stories are how we heal together. And if you'd like more journeys about second chances, found family, and love that chooses to stay, subscribe and walk with us. There are many more doors waiting to open.